is you can use the sun. It's better actually in the summertime when the sun is more overhead, but one of the density and openness. If you look at the dappled shadow that the sun is casting on the ground underneath the tree, you can use that as a gauge. If you have a nice balance of shadow and light, that tells you that you have, at midday or when the sun's overhead, that tells us that you have a nice balance of openness and airiness. You don't want too much to where the tree's going to get sunburned, but you don't want too little to where the canopy is dense and you're creating a conducive situation for a mite infestation.
So when would you do orange trees?
Orange trees, I believe you can do more or less any time of the year. I really do. Depending upon the citrus too. You flowering, like I wouldn't prune while, well, if I was pruning while it was flowering, I would be cognizant of the fact that like I'm taking off potential fruit. So that's always the question of timing is, am I going to be affecting how necessary it is? Is it to do this pruning? And if it is necessary, what are going to be the consequences of it? Am I going to have a reduced output this year as a result of my pruning? But yeah, citrus I find. Deadwood, you can prune out anytime. It's amazing. You look at a tree and you think, oh God, I really need to prune this tree. And oftentimes you just take that deadwood out. You go, you take your time with it. You get all that deadwood out, not just the 1 inch thick branches, but the twigs. And then you step back and you look and you go, wow, that tree looks a lot better. And all you've done is you've taken the deadwood out. It's amazing, deadwooding, how much of an effect that can have in terms of reducing crown density. Yes, sir.
I have some kumquat trees, and the new growth tends to come in. I don't know if it's buggy or disease. It's wrinkly and not looking happy. You just prune that off as soon as you get it.
The question was in regards to new growth on kumquat trees, how it comes in kind of wrinkly.
Yeah.
Well, that could be in response to the new growth of the tree, the new leaf. It's soft. It hasn't really developed a hard cuticle, and it's much easier for the insects with the piercing, sucking mouth parts to access that leaf. So it seems to be the new leaves often are the ones that are most affected. Now the question is, do you prune that out?
Well, treat it with insecticide or?
Let me back up a little bit. Are you surprised? Well, no, because there's never any. I don't really find that there's a clear-cut answer. Let me see. Why was I going to back up? Okay. It's a good idea to view the leaf as a solar panel. Most people, we have solar panels in our houses. They're generating energy. They're generating electricity. The leaves are the tree's solar panels. They're generating the food for the tree. They are. They're with the photosynthesis. The products of photosynthesis, that's what's fueling the tree. So if you're taking leaves off, you're taking solar panels away. You're taking energy producing capacity away from the tree. What I typically find is, are we treating the problem or are we treating symptoms? Oh, we see wrinkled new leaves. Oh my God, it's a problem. Let's treat it. Let's spray it. Let's do something. Maybe it might be better to wait. A lot of times those trees can outgrow that. They're temporarily disfigured. Maybe they're not so disfigured that as that leaf expands even more, as it hardens off, it could possibly outgrow that disfigurement. So that's one consideration I would make. The other is aesthetics. If you don't, if you find, for whatever reason, you find those disfigured leaves to be problematic, then that's going to inform your decision to deal with them. Whether that's pruning it out, whether that's using a chemical to deal with the problem. One word I know this is a pruning workshop, but one word that I would like to put out there in terms of pest control is, yeah, there are certainly things that we can do. We've got some chemicals out there that can solve some problems. But I tend to think about that as that's a more of a heavy-handed approach. maybe the analogy would be kind of like, why use a nuclear bomb to solve a problem when a fly swatter might solve it. So meaning, I don't know if I would necessarily go so quickly to use the chemical. That's a big gun. I might want to save that for if it's a real problem. Maybe there's easier things you can do. Maybe you can use a soapy water spray. Maybe you can use beneficial insects that are going to deal with that problem. And just when we're talking about pest infestation, we don't ever want we don't ever want complete eradication. We really don't. What we're talking about is a natural ecosystem here. Those very pests that are disfiguring those new leaves on the kumquat, they're a food source for other beneficial pests that might be residing on that tree. If you go ahead and eliminate the food source, you get rid of all those damn piercing sucking insects. Now the beneficial insects, they don't have a food supply, they're going to go elsewhere. And the old saying, what's going to happen? What's going to happen when the cat's away? The mice are going to play. Meaning, now the beneficials are gone because their food supply is not around. Now there can be a reinfestation of that same pest that caused the problem. So rather than complete eradication, why don't we try to minimize? Why don't we try to create a balance? Why don't we try to realize that what's a manageable amount of infestation? You know, can it be beneficial in terms of an overall ecosystem that nature is dealing with, that the tree in and of itself, without our interference? That's what I would recommend, as much as possible. That's what I would recommend going for. Now, that depends on scale. If you're a backyard gardener, you can do that. If you have a huge orchard of 15, 20 acre orchard out in Hemet, you may not be able to do that. So it depends on the scale of the project. But I highly recommend save the big guns for when you really need them. Let's see. There are specifics. So we've talked about forming the proper structure of the tree. We've talked about size control, constraining it within the box that you want. Now, let's see. Dead branches. For diseased branches, yes, you'd want to cut that out. Dying branches, yes, you know it's dying. One of the ways you can tell, a very quick test, is the branch dead, is either do the snap test. If you can very easily snap a twig, a stem, that's dead. And you don't need to deal with it anymore, you can just get rid of it. If you're still uncertain, you can take a knife, you can take your fingernail, and you can just scrape the outside of the branch. And if you see green, that even though there's no leaves on the particular stem, that's still alive. So that's a helpful little test. That's a very quick, helpful test that you can do to determine if the branch is dead or not, or dying. Dysfunctional. This one gets people. What's a dysfunctional branch? Generally, we like, whether it's open vase or central leader, we're generally wanting our branches to grow outward, whether that's upward, whether that's just horizontally. We generally don't want stuff growing back into the center of the tree where it causes congestion, or where you can have mechanical rubbing when branches cross each other and they rub on each other. That can cause a problem. That can cause a wound where a pathogen can get in. So in general, we try to direct our growth upward and outward. However, there may be an instance where, like, I don't want to plant this idea of like any crossing interior branch needs to be cut out. No, think about it. That branch that's crossing may be a candidate. Oh, it meets the 4Ds, but maybe what is it doing? Is it supporting another major portion of the tree? If you cut out that crossing branch because you're like, oh, I've got to take out all the 4Ds, what is the effect of removing that branch? So just because it's crossing doesn't mean that it's necessarily a candidate for removal. remember, everything that I'm putting out here today, it's just guidelines. It's just a starting point. You know, there's always variation within these parameters. Let me see. So we talked about a proper pruning cut. A proper pruning cut, when you're cutting a branch off and you've identified that branch collar and you're cutting just outside the branch collar, we don't want to leave stubs. If you leave a stub is not going to allow the tree protection mechanisms that are present in the branch collar to come into effect. So we want to make a proper cut. But if it's a heavy branch, if it's a long or heavy branch, the way that we're recommending making the cut is it's a three-part process. We start a little bit out where, let's say my armpit is the branch collar. We're going to start outward, a little bit outboard of that branch collar, and we're going to make an undercut, maybe about a third of the way through the thickness of that branch. Once we've made that undercut, now we're going to go a little bit outward of that undercut, and we're going to make our cut all the way through. That's going to cause that heavy branch to snap at that point. Once that's done, now you can make your final cut at that branch collar. Not all branches need to be cut like that, but the branches that are long and heavy, that's the recommended way of doing it. And the reason why we're doing that is because if we don't make that undercut, if it's a real heavy or long branch, if we just made that cut from the top all the way through, there's a very good possibility that once we get to the end of the cut, unless we're holding it with our free hand, that branch it's not just gonna fall off, it's gonna fall and it's gonna rip, and there's gonna be a portion of the underside of that branch that's gonna go down onto the trunk, and it's gonna detach, it's gonna rip. Now you've just created a larger wound when you didn't have to. So that's the three-step process to any sort of branch, like a heavy branch that needs to be cut. Pruning tools. I personally like my Felco pruning shears. These are Felco number 7. This was Tom Del Hotel's recommendation. It's got the rotating handle. For years I resisted it. I thought, it's a gimmick, I don't like it. But I found, for whatever reason, the ability of my hand to rotate just that little bit when I'm finishing a cut, it really, really helps. So I have a whole bunch of different tools, but I find most of the time I can get away with using these hand pruners. As we get into bigger branches, then we can go up in saw size. So you can see here, I have a variety of saws depending upon what it is I'm doing. If it's a thick, heavy branch, I'm going to use the bigger saw, the bigger, hungrier saw. These saws all cut on the pole, not on the push. This will make a rough cut though, which is fine, but if you're really concerned, let's say the cut that you're making is in a highly visible place, maybe you want to make a really good job of making a proper, really, really proper, nice, clean cut, then these smaller, finer blades I found are very good for that. Sometimes in narrow crotch angles, I can't get my big saw in there, but I can get this in there. So your hand pruners, your saws, loppers, fine and dandy, good leverage, fairly good ability. You can cut maybe a 2.5 inch branch with this. It's not going to be a super clean cut, but maybe it's enough to get you started. This might be a rough tool. You don't always have to make your finishing cut. You can cut your branches back in steps. A lot of times when I'm pruning, I may not really know if I want to remove a branch all at once, so I may whittle. That means I'll start at the end of the branch and I'll go to a side branch and I'll make the cut there. Oh, maybe I like that. Maybe that's okay. Maybe that's going to suit my purpose. Oh, you know what? No, I don't like that. I think I can go farther back. You can allow yourself to whittle. Don't feel that you have to do everything all at once. That's just how my mind works. I like that option. Let's see. Releadering. Did I talk about a releadering cut? I started to answer your question about with a heading cut and what a heading cut does. A releadering cut is when you're reducing the length of a branch. You're not taking it all the way back to the trunk. You're just reducing the length of it. When you do that, you want it where you make that cut. That cut should be made at a side branch that is ideally 1/3 the diameter of the thickness of the portion of the branch that you're removing. That's what's called releadering. They also call that natural target or natural target pruning. It's the same thing. Some people might even call it heading, but I don't like that term. I like to call it releadering. So that's a way that you could reduce the length of a branch, and that's another type of pruning cut. And then the final type of pruning cut is what's called a thinning cut. That's where you're going all the way back to the main point of attachment, all the way back to the trunk. And why would you want to do that? Most of the time, maybe it's a dead branch, but most of the time it's very conducive to this idea of opening the tree up to light and air penetration. So those are the three main types of pruning cuts. You could get into something called pollarding and coppicing. The big difference between pollarding and coppicing, my understanding, is a coppicing is a cut that's going to be made basically at ground level, whereas a pollard, you'll see sycamores, you'll see crepe myrtles. It's this idea that you're bringing the growth of the tree back to a fixed growing point. So initially, why would you want to do that? Maybe you're constrained with space. I believe this comes really from back in like ancient or whatever, in like earlier Europe, where they utilized the wood. The wood could be used for fences. The wood could be used for firewood. The wood could be used for making baskets. So rather than cut the whole tree down, they would create a growing point, and every year you would get these long whips of wood coming off that growing point. When you're finished using it, you would cut everything back to that growing point, and then next year the cycle would repeat. That's called pollarding. So that's a type of heading cut. That would be an intentional type of heading cut. But the idea there is that anytime you're doing a heading cut, all you're doing is, at that point, is you're creating, going forward, a whole bunch of new growth coming out from that point.
When you say fruit comes on new growth or 1 year old growth, you have to cut away all the old growth to keep making room for the new growth?
No, not necessarily, because you could get spurs that are growing off of the old growth. So in that case, so it's a matter of knowing your material, knowing the tree that you're working with. Does it grow on spurs? When does the tree produce? So I have a list right here. I wouldn't expect you to memorize it, but I could also get this information to you. But when we're talking about fruit spurs, deciduous fruit trees that that produce fruit off spurs are going to be your almonds, apples, apricots, pears, plums, and pomegranates. Deciduous fruit trees that are bearing fruit on last year's wood or the previous year's wood, they're going to be apples. Apples have spurs too. Chestnuts, figs, mulberries, nectarines, peaches, pecans, plums, pomegranates, walnuts, and jujubes. And then fruit that is going to be growing on the current season's growth. Figs, mulberries, persimmon, quince, and walnut. So that's a general outline of what trees are producing fruit on what. That informs your pruning decision. So yet, some spur, depending upon the trees, you can have viable spurs for short term. Apricot, I believe, is apricot. Their spurs are viable for 2 years. I believe other trees you can have a much long cherries. You can have cherries that are producing fruit on very very long lived spurs. But over time, that's another part of fruit tree pruning is spur editing. Spurs will lose their viability. They'll start producing less and less. The quality of fruit goes down. When that's happening, that's a time to prune. You can prune those spurs out. Doesn't mean you're never going to get fruit off that branch. It just means that you have to. That spur has run its course. Now it's time to let a newer, younger spur come in and carry the load of the fruit production. But again, that's very specific to the particular tree that you have. But that's also that would also be a consideration for pruning. And that's the 4Ds and all that stuff that we talk about. That's really structure, modified vase, open vase. That's all structure and architecture. That's fine. That's setting the table for your production. But how to keep the fruit going once that table's already set, that's really where most of the pruning is going to be happening. And that, depending upon the tree and the pest associated with that, the timing that you'd carry that out, it's going to be dependent on that particular item. Yes, ma'am.
So when you cut off the spur, you leave the branch.
Yeah.
Just take off the
spur. Yeah. And the way that you can identify spurs, So if you look along the length of the stem, twig, branch, choose your nomenclature. It's the nodes are going to be very, very closely spaced together. A lot of times you look at, particularly the deciduous, they're going to have nodes. You can determine the amount of growth that's happened in any given year by looking at the length between the nodes on your stems. But when you have a concentration of nodes very close together, that's more than likely going to be where a spur is going to occur. Now, I'm sure there's other stuff that I want to talk about, but maybe you guys want to see demonstration, or do you have more questions? Yes.
So I have a semi-dwarf mandarin, but it gets these like really long, fast-growing branches that come off, and they just grow really long and fast. And then the other branches, you get they're nice, slow-growing, thin ones, and these long ones, they can grow, 6 feet long in one summer. You just whack those things off.
My question to you would be, what is the byproduct of those long whips, as we call them?
They just grow really big, and then all of a sudden my tree is, twice as big as I want it to be.
But are those whips over time, if you leave those whips untended, will they eventually start producing flowers and fruit?
Some of them do, but they're just way up there. So they finally produce at the very top, but now the tree is twice as tall as I want it to be.
So the question was, the lady has a kumquat tree that periodically produces very, very long
Actually,
whips.
it's a mandarin.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
a mandarin tree that produces very long whips, and eventually, if she leaves them unattended, they will produce fruit, but it's at the end. Yes, in that case, it sounds to me like those whips are exceeding the parameters of what you want for that tree. I think it would be okay to remove those. One of the thoughts is, by removing that, you're concentrating the energy that's available to the fruit and the branches and the leaves that are there. So if it's not serving a purpose for you, then I would eliminate them.
And cut it all the way back to the trunk,
Play around with it.
depending on.
Yeah. I mean, you could reduce the length. It's conceivable that you could reduce the length of that whip to something that might be manageable, and that's the beauty of it. Is if you have room to play and if you have time, then you would be better informed than I would. Oh, I cut this whip back 5 years ago, and now it's a branch, and it forms really, really nice mandarin oranges. Or, oh, you know what? I reduced the length of that branch, and it didn't do anything. I would play around with it.
So these aren't wild, like breakthrough standard branches that are kind of reverting back to a standard tree versus a semi-dwarf.
Oh,
And it's well above the ground. I mean, it's
Yeah.
well up in the tree.
that could be the case. I don't. Other considerations would be merited, like is it getting fertilized with an excessive amount of nitrogen fertilizer? Is it exposed to a huge amount of sun? Has your neighbor cut down those eucalyptus trees that are on the border, and now there's a whole bunch more sun coming in, and maybe that's why that's happening? I don't know.
On those, I love to graft to those. I like to graft to those.
Oh.
Because they're super healthy.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you brought that up, Frank. I'm not. Sadly, I'm not very well versed in grafting. I'm hoping to get more. I'm hoping to become a part of you guys and learn this. Yeah, very, very into it. The idea of it. So I don't know. So thank you for interjecting that. Yeah. And you do bring up a point. Another point about pruning and grafts and below the graft is when we're starting our pruning. You do want to be aware of what are called suckers. Tom Del Hotel will say most of our fruit trees are grafted, and basically he says the only fruit trees that aren't grafted are pomegranates and figs. That's what my notes say from him. So, meaning that if most fruit trees are grafted, if you're seeing suckers coming out, that means it's coming out from the rootstock. And that I've seen situations where people don't realize what's happening in that rootstock. Those suckers, they begin to outcompete the scion, and next thing you know, the scion is gone, and the rootstock has taken over. So when we're starting our pruning, that's really where we want to start. Is let's remove the suckers first, and that reminded me of what I did want to finish up with. So at least what I wanted to touch on. Is everything okay? Is this too haphazard and scattered for you?
No. Good.
Okay, thank you. Okay. The best way, honestly, the best habit to get into for pruning, now we're talking about pruning, all these considerations we've taken into, we've taken them in. We know we're okay with the cuts that we're going to make at the time of year. We're cognizant of the time, of the size of the tree that we want to leave. We're cognizant of what the fruit is going to do. Now we made the decision to utilize our pruning tools. We're going to get our hands dirty. We're going to start by cutting out the suckers. Then, starting from the ground, the very first branch that you come to, that is where you should start. And I'd like to think about this in terms of a fractal. Step back and view the tree from a little bit of a distance. What are you going to see? You're going to see a central stem, and you're going to see branches starting from the ground and going up to the top. And generally speaking, the branches closer to the ground, they're going to be closer spaced. They're going to be more dense, more closely spaced. They may even have a tendency to be, maybe they're going to be shooting upright, but more than likely they're going to be sort of drooping down or possibly horizontal. As you go further up the tree, the branches in general are going to go like this, to where once you're at the top of the tree, the branches are going to be in an upright pattern, generally speaking. All right. And as you get up to the top of the tree, there's going to be more space between those branches. So when I say the tree is a fractal, that's what you keep in mind. When you're going to when you started your pruning and you've removed the suckers, and now you've gone up the trunk, and now you're going to that first branch, keep that overall shape of the tree in mind and treat that first branch as you would the tree. Meaning you want to start that first branch, you want to start your pruning. Maybe you need to decide if you want to take that first branch off, if you want to make a thinning cut and cut that first branch at the trunk. If you don't, if you're going to leave it, then you want to go out from the trunk towards the end of the branch, and you want to cut those side branchlets off that main branch in conjunction with the overall shape of the tree, meaning you're going to have longer branches nearer the trunk, and then as you extend down the length, you want an even distribution. It doesn't need to be thick and full and overgrown. It should be like a feather. If the branch is horizontal, it should be like a feather. You maybe want to take the downward and the upward branches, branchlets that are growing off that branch, you want to take them off, and you mainly want to leave those side ones. And then if you can discipline yourself to prune like this, then you get to the end of that first lowest branch. Then you go back to the trunk. Now you go up to that next branch, and you treat that branch the same way in terms of your pruning. That is the best habit to get into, and that's what I would highly recommend. Next thing you know, you've worked your way all the way up the tree. And when you're pruning for fruit, you want to think about things like exposure to sun. You want to be cognizant of what's above you, what's above the branch. Is the branch that you're working on, is it going to be shaded out by a branch above it? Is the branch you're working on shading out the branch that's below it? Is there ample space for the fruit once it's on the tree and that branch is going to sag? Is there ample space to where those branches aren't going to be on top of each other? These are what you want to be aware of when you're pruning. The other thought was horizontal branches, for the most part, you want to prune them like feathers, and you don't want the concentration of foliage at the end of the branch. That's what's called a lion's tail. There's a tendency to want to do that. It's all condensed underneath the tree. We're starting underneath the tree. I can't see anything. I've got leaves in my face. Let me get these leaves out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. Next thing you know, you've removed most of the leaves or branchlets from the trunk outward, and now you've got this concentration of mass at the end. That makes that branch weak. It subjects it to what's called the lever arm. It's going to concentrate the fruit out there. It's going to pull even harder. It's going to be weaker on that union. So you want a nice even distribution of branchlets along the length of the branch that you're working with. And the general thought is horizontal branches are pruned like a feather. Remove the downward, remove the upwards. And if you get a more upward tending branch, you can treat that like a spiral staircase, meaning not like a feather, but the branchlets that you're leaving are going to be properly spaced, and they want to be radially spaced and distributed along the length of that branch. Those are the primary considerations to have when you're undertaking a pruning operation. Any questions on that?
You want to go show pruning at citrus trees?
Sure.
Some other trees?
Sure.
Yeah. We can prune here, so we can show you pruning directly. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And then, does anybody need any water? We're going to be bringing some over in a minute here. Here's two here. Do you need water?
Can I get a picture of your trees that you were listing off? Yeah. Starting my trees up again. We've got a new home.
Oh, fun.
And a nice big
Yeah.
I never got apricots.
You never. Oh.
Because I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, apricots are weird too. They they grow. A lot of times people, those whips, they will produce fruit next year.
Yeah.
But a lot of times the people don't realize that, and they prune it off, and then they're like, man, I pruned into the open vase. It's still not producing. Why not? Why not? You know.
Apricots is one of those.
Yes. Yeah. I have a very young apricot. I planted a fairly super high thing.
Now
By
this
not
is
bringing
perfect.
cow
Wow,
here.
three branches coming up, two stems coming
We're
up.
gonna need, yeah.
One of those things will put a little stem out the side.
It's sneaky.
They could be responding to conditions like maybe competition from the other
Watch out, the camera's
branches
recording.
are forcing it to do that.
It's funny when you mention about,
If you
you have
don't
to tell
if it's
people,
not
be careful about who's
if it's not
at my mom's house.
conducive
My
to the
brother,
shape that you want,
she said,
then
"Can you-"
I would eliminate
it
it.
was this semi-dwarf grapefruit I was talking about, and it got too tall.
Yeah,
And she wanted
you
to bring it down,
look
so
and
she said,
see.
told my
Well,
brother,
a fruit
you know,
spur is not
can you
gonna
cut some
be
off
really
the
long.
top? I want to have
It's
it
not
not
going
so
to be
tall.
elongated. It's going to be really
So
short
he
and
came
stiff.
in because she basically wanted
So
a
if
fence
it's,
height so that you could reach the fruit,
Yeah.
right? Well, he came in, he cut off all the branches up to here, everything at the lower branches,
Was he
because he couldn't get. He said, "Well, I can't get to the tall ones, so I need to cut off the low ones to get to the tall ones." So then, once he had all the low branches off,
Yeah, and it's usually
now
the
if he cut it
spurs
off
are going to
at
be
fence height where
produced
she
off
wanted
of what's
it,
called second
there would be no
tier
tree
wood.
left.
That's where
So over time,
where
you know,
that's where
luckily,
the spurs are
like
gonna-
hair,
initially.
things start to grow
Yeah, but it
back,
takes a lot
right?
longer.
It takes a long time. So gradually we cut off one branch, and then as soon as you cut, things start
Yeah.
coming out, right?
Yeah,
So finally,
and
after a
then-
year or so,
but
they
then
started
just,
coming out
you know,
from down
keep in
below.
mind that
So
the
we
fruit,
cut one off
it
here.
may
The
not
next
be
year we cut
viable, you know,
another one
it's
off,
still
and we
gonna
came
produce
down to our
fruit,
last.
but
We have one more to cut.
most
Yeah.
of the
on one
energy
side,
is
but
going towards getting established
ready
on
to
the
kill it.
site. So if the fruit, don't be discouraged. Of course, you plant a tree, it produces fruit, you want to eat it. Don't be discouraged if it's initially not good. Don't have high expectations, okay? Because it's sort of like this idea of half baked. Not all the energy has gone into producing that fruit. Most of the energy has gone into establishing it. What little bit of leftover energy has gone to produce the fruit.
You would better produce fruit, you're not gonna pluck the fruit off.
There's sort of two schools of thought on that. One is, let that branch be subjected to a load of fruit. Let it get stronger, kind of like weight lifting. Let it get stronger, you know, and see what happens. Is it a decent
Well, and
fruit?
don't they always say
It's
you
a
have
nice
to graft it?
foundation.
Grow it.
Produced fruit.
Right.
Then grab it.
Bitter
And then
was
put a
bad. I
graft
didn't
on it.
like it. But after 4 or 5 years, after it got established, the quality of it.
I don't know if you guys heard, we have avocado seeds.
If you have the opportunity to get in on the ground floor like that and to play with it and to answer those questions, I think that's what they need. I'm an arborist. I work with Bartlett tree experts. So I'm at my principal duties right now are plant healthcare technician. So going over to big properties in Santa Monica, West Los Angeles, California. You know, I was at Courtney Cox's house yesterday, like training for. So that's I could do that, sure. Let's see. If I don't have one in my wallet, I got it in my car. Yeah, what's your name? Larry and Jeff. Let's see. Did
I can't tell.
I should have got my card. No, but I have them in my car, so.
Well, maybe you can help me then.
Okay.
I haven't had it
And next to it, I have a lamp
something's eating or something.
Frank might have mine still. I can have it.
That's what I wrote in. You know what?
Okay.
That's what I wrote from the
Larry.
Whenever I say pass, I always
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for your question.
On the tree left after what? 47 trees. We redone it, I think.
it's like half, right? Half is
You're welcome. Thanks for your patience. I think so, yes.
No, there's no seed. I mean, they're
Whoever you have for us.
I think it's
Probably, because some of these guys jump over your
Not necessarily.
Well, I'm not
still
getting
part of the
You have a cross-pollinating the nearby plants, you're fine. I think there's another avocado.
but I'm not getting it. I get
run away.
And then they find out and they just
how
throw
old?
it.
5
5 years of plum?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I got one
Sometimes
year
it
I
takes
got
about 5
chocolate
years.
persimmons, and I'm trying to get something out of it. But then the last
Here, let me move this.
Fred, could you grab my? Do you have an extra hand to grab my lopper?
Can you get this lopper?
Thank you.
Okay. So,
Is there going to be some pruning going on?
yes.
Frank, you wouldn't have any idea if they have shampoo ginger here.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know. Oh, can you put that on top?
5 years.
Oop, make sure that's plugged
Good
in.
luck with what you've inherited.
Okay, making sure I have connection. Okay, so bring your stuff and follow us.
You see when you buy a 2-3-year-old tree, all these little flowers and
Well, I'm
fruit,
not.
most of them are going
I'm
to
very
fall
fortunate.
off.
I
I
have
know
a
they're
big
not
head of
old
hair.
enough now.
So that,
And
if I didn't
then
have
you
the
have
hat,
the
the hair could have helped.
architecture. I like that term. To hold this.
Thank you.
Okay.
So on that note, I also have a young tree.
All right. You want to lead the way?
Okay.
And
Hey, thanks, Frank.
Uh-huh.
I'm Justin. I
Hi,
met
Justin.
you a couple times at the other chapter meetings and stuff. I think didn't you bring some jackfruit?
No, I didn't bring that's usually Denny.
Maybe, yeah. But I've seen you around, like
Oh, yeah.
at here at the wasn't it? There was one on like bring your favorite. Are you still filming?
Yeah, I'm filming. Yeah. Are you gonna watch the pruning part?
Oh, I thought we were closing up.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I'll split.
Here, oh, here's some. How about a blood orange? Let's see. There.
I didn't have a big reaction when it just that would just
No.
I got one. I don't remember even which manufacturer was, but the handles can slide in and out. So they can give you more electric.
Oh yeah, I've seen those.
We need to get some of the chairs.
is this the Wi-Fi
Yeah, those are
extender or
good.
something?
No, that's just this microphone.
Otherwise, you just
Oh, it's yours?
No, it's his.
well, it's either that or a saw at that point.
Let's see here. Okay,
Do you need something?
we need a couple of the chairs that were over there. So,
For the...
yeah.
Everybody, there's Jamaican cherries here. They were picked this morning. They're not washed, not sprayed.
How many chairs do you need?
I'll put
Two.
it over here by the water. Help yourself to water. These Jamaican cherries have hundreds of seeds in every fruit, so they should sprout pretty easily.
I'll be right back. I can use the bathroom.
Okay, yeah. Straight up.
Yep. Thank you.
They're really small, thin trees. And mine doesn't get very much water, so it grows really slowly. But it's like,
This kind of stuff, talking about that kind of good.
Yeah, that's a lot of that's just that new growth that's susceptible to the.
How long do you wait to see if that's covered?
mine are, and then what do you do with these? You just eat them, just eat them.
Like brown sugar.
Yeah, I don't. Is it the question I would have is it going to be? Is it worth it to leave it? You know,
Let's hear it's easy to cut that.
it's certainly easy to cut it. The question is, would it be? Is it growing? Do I want to leave it? Do I want to leave it because I want it to grow outward? You know, to grow say because this is a unique tree in that it's sort of leaping. It's kind of what I would call top heavy. It's got more growth on the top that's growing. It's shading out this undergrowth.
You said that's going to be covered.
It's down. You can take a look at
My house, my property burned to the ground.
I'm sorry.
And I put it out of 40.
Okay.
Old,
No.
that's kind of what
And then
it
we
had.
get, I'll get the pots.
Are you?
The black pots that are over there.
Well, I know what they are.
Okay, yeah. Bring that over here.
They grow way more like
It was bigger than this. But anyway, what I did, I excavated,
so vigorous. Like you'll
put
see
that
like
dirt over it,
if you
and
put like a
start
cutting
watering.
in, you'll have like a trunk caliper like that thick.
Just because I felt sorry.
Okay.
Nothing else.
It grows like
Is
moringa.
it citrus? Okay.
So
I just
container
contacted both of
grown
them.
is probably a good way.
Are we gonna continue the meeting with Pruning?
Yeah, it's recorded.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay,
Contacted both of those
for the
guys.
people who are still online, give me a second. Okay, we're still working on our tag,
Do you know
plant tags, where we can produce them
Beautiful, the way they were coming.
in quantity.
So proud. All of a sudden, every one of them.
Okay,
intact? Would I kill it or?
made a
Okay.
device that we can insert different stencils in, so we can do impressions of this. The goal is to do it on aluminum
This leaf
blinds.
is thinner.
So once we get this set up, we're going to have it as a press, where we'll be able to
Resprouted
do a
from
lot
the
of them
ground,
quickly.
getting burned to the ground.
Yeah, we had a few real hot days,
So
so living through the last.
look forward to that in the future. And we're going to make the labels available to members.
And let them grow.
And this is what,
And cut and be one of
you
the-
can't see it. Careful that it's in the
I
sun.
don't want to do it right now because what if they die?
Okay, so
and
see
then-
this label here
but
versus you handwriting it.
those die also. So let them grow for the, I don't know.
So longevity is the key. We're figuring at least 10 to 15 years of being visible and readable. And since we can do a lot at a time, the cost will be very low to us, just the cost of free aluminum blinds that people throw away.
For the insects to attack it.
Okay.
To attack it.
On our property,
By the way,
Okay.
two weeks later.
What will Jeff be pruning?
But not that much.
Please.
all over.
We gotta move back over.
One of the tough questions is
They're pretty trailer.
with the neem oil. Was the neem oil applied during a hot time? Was it 85 degrees? Okay. Okay. So that's good. So you didn't create any phytotoxicity. I
You also have to, when it's too cold, apply the neem oil because it's solidified.
yes. Yeah.
So it's a threshold in there.
Sounds like that.
Tell me about it.
But he's describing a situation where unfortunately his property burned and the citrus trees that were there, they burned to the ground, but he left them and they resprouted. So he's wondering, should he leave it? And the stuff that came back was really great at first, and then it got hit by an insect. So he's wondering if it's worth it for him to leave it. But I'm thinking it's the rootstock, and I don't know if he's going to get
If
viable.
it's coming from the ground, it's probably gonna be the sucker stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely the root stock.
At a niche from the ground.
Well, I would question, first off, making sure angles, because if it's burned off, did you cut it off after that? Or did you let the
No.
random,
That they burn to the.
yeah.
Yeah, coming from the ground, that's your trifolate or your standard.
Yeah, because you're going to have a
rootstock.
lot of exposure to areas that normally aren't, because it's, you basically had a trunk that was whatever, and then it's been burned to the ground, so it's sort of flat. And now rotting and stuff is happening to the exposed wood, so it's going to have a divot in it. Is it divot? Right? Where it's going to be prone to all sorts of infections, insects, to the open wood.
Should I wait till February, March to trim them or trim them now?
Here, about a foot from the ground, this tree starts a foot from the ground.
We should actually pull them out.
To burn below that line.
It might, because you're going to have trouble with the wound never healing. It's just going to cover itself up, but it's still going to have a divot
My,
where it's going to
my
have tendency
question
water to
is,
sit.
To learn more on
will
subject.
you be subjected to cold where
I
you
have
are?
to
You said you're up in the
prune, like, all the
mountains.
time.
Is it going to be cold?
Yes.
Then there's a very good likelihood that
How much
cold
stuff do you
is
grow?
going to take out what you
I
leave.
mean, like, it's
So
literally
I don't
like
know.
an 8
For me, it would be an
by-
experiment.
Sure.
I guess if you're
The width
committed
of
to
the
try to
balcony
make
is
it
probably-
work,
It's less than this in width.
Well, if then,
And then the length is
I'm
like
gonna graft them anyway because we don't know what they are.
just like
Yeah.
Now we
Okay.
don't know.
okay.
No, no.
Then yeah, at the very least, say make your cuttings and do store them however you're going to store them, and then see. Just wait and see. That's the only way I can answer your question. I'm sorry. I would wait and see what happens. I don't want to tell you to go ahead and take them out.
Thank you.
Grapes.
Okay.
So not right now then.
Oh, delight,
No, but we
that's
stamped them.
Pitahaya. Number 12.
See, we're working to make a stamp to stamp labels into aluminum blinds.
Nice.
So that way it'll be easy to tag the trees and tag multiple areas.
And not
Because once we make, this is part of it, and then we're gonna have a post thingy where it rolls across the blind to do the name. And then if you're in a blind, you just do it this, push it in, do it this, keep pushing it. And make a whole bunch, just cut it off, put a hole punch. So we're gonna have the goal is to have like thousands of each name. Like we'll have like Haas, 1,000 of them. And then make it available to members so they can have multiple, if they graft it, they can have multiple places on the tree, they can identify what it is. And they have multiple cuttings.
That's good, because I've got a citrus tree that has like 5 different apples.
But you can't, well that's pretty good.
It's an apple, and they surprise. Well, no, sorry, an apple tree with a It was supposed. I bought it at Lowe's. It was supposed to have 3 grafts, but it came with 5.
Yeah.
But it had all the little plastic tags. Now I don't know which one is which, but
with
it's
this,
cool. It has all the different ones, but the
tag it
metal
in
is
one
good.
area,
Yeah.
Tag it another, so you could trace it across. Like dragon fruit, they can be intertwined. And if you wanted to track it, you could actually put spend your time. Okay, I found. Okay, it goes out to here. Okay, I put a label here.
Wow.
Over here, I'll put a label. And then since it's aluminum indented, it's going to last a long time. And then what we do is we'll take copper wire. Let me do this on the video. We'll take copper wire, tie the tag, and then we won't tie it on the tree. We'll just wrap it around like this. So as the tree grows, it doesn't girdle it. And copper wire is pretty cheap, solid core. I'm not sure which gauge this is, but you can just gauge it yourself. It's easy enough to move, but not where it's just weak. And you find that works best. Yeah, we have a bunch of little projects we're trying to work on. We're taking pots. I volunteer at Food Pantry Hub, and I help go out in the morning to different stores and pick up food. And a lot of them have these pots that they're like this. They don't have any holes. They're typically for flowers. So they're putting them in the back or tossing them. And it's like, well, I can use those for pots for a fundraiser. And normal pots are like this. Well, I have a soldering iron that's made for, sun. That's made for toner cartridges. Heat up the toner cartridge, put a hole in it, and that way you can inject the toner in it, and then put a piece of tape over it to seal it up. Well, this is the perfect size for making pots. Just do that, just like because they actually stamp them when they do it. But we can do it just by putting however many hose we want for the pots, and it's helping us reuse something.
Reuse, recycle.
Yeah.
You lost connection.
Okay.
And that's good to carry fruit and eggs you picked,
Yeah.
too, without the holes.
What happened with the connect?
Dragon fruit. I've got it.
We found out there's no power here,
Yeah, I know.
and it's like that makes it a little awkward with something. And then the Wi-Fi connection kept disconnecting, and I think it had to do with the puck wasn't charged up that they gave us. So it is it you're hearing?
Connected. It says connected. Maybe we don't have to put it in again.
So it's a bummer for the people who were remotely there.
So I read something somewhere that said that horizontal branches produce more fruit than the ones that. Is that true?
Yeah. But then that's not hard and fast. Over time, that horizontal is going to become droopy. It can become shaded out. It can become less productive. So what was once nice and productive, maybe now it's in decline, and maybe that upright, which was more vegetative at one point, now that's assumed the role. So it's an ongoing cycle. Yeah.
It needs to come down.
Let me know when you're ready.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, great. All right, welcome back, people. So here we are over at this blood orange tree. I don't need this now, do I?
It would help.
Okay. Can you still hear?
For this.
Yeah, maybe turn it up a little bit.
How do I do it?
Let's see. Try it now.
Hello, test 1 2 test. Hello, hello,
Let me see, Jack.
hello, hello.
Let me see. Put it down. Okay, now try it.
Now try, now try. Hello, hello. Now try, now try. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Hello,
that's better.
hello. Okay. All right. So here we are at this blood orange tree. We're going to do a pruning demonstration. So while Frank was discussing some of his great innovative ideas, I was looking at what my approach would be towards pruning this, and I guess first thing I'm asking myself is, is it a good time? Would I do this now? Why would I do it now compared to other times? Well, we had this fall equinox about almost a month ago, so the sun's not as high in the sky. The sun is not as intense, so I'm more inclined to want to work on this now. I may be more reticent to do this type of work in the summertime. So time of year is important. And what am I seeing? Why are we pruning? Well, we're pruning to give a demonstration. But aside from that, I see that the tree already has an established architecture. So in terms of trying to really impart any particular habit or style to it, that process could be initiated. Maybe I don't know the requirements of this particular space, what the people want. I don't know if they want me altering the architecture. Does the architecture need to be altered? The biggest thing I see is a dense canopy in here, as well as branches that are beginning to encroach onto the pathway. So, do I have permission to do whatever I want? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I give you permission.
Okay. Thank you.
You have the authority to grant that permission.
It's on tape. We have it.
I have the authority.
All right. A couple other things just that I'm taking note of. What are the soil conditions? Is there undergrowth? I see a lot of ants on the tree, which tell why the ants are there for a reason. There's honeydew producing insects in the tree. That's the only reason why the ants are on the tree. So separate from pruning, these are just things that are in my field of awareness. One thing might be ant mitigation, starting with a nice. I don't know if that gentleman was here. Maybe it was you, Larry. We talked about disfigured kumquat leaves and would you spray them and things like that. So seeing the ants, would I just go ahead? How would I deal with that? I could use tanglefoot. I could wrap a band of some kind of substrate around the tree, particularly this thin bark tree. I would not apply tanglefoot wax directly to this thin bark tree. I could use that to try to keep the ants at bay. I could also use a soapy water spray. I could presume.
Okay. It's turn that thing out so it points forward. Okay, here. That's why. Okay. There.
Okay. I could presume, like I did, that the ants are in the tree because there's a piercing sucking insect that's producing honeydew, and so I could go after that. I could use a heavy chemical spray. I could knock everything off this tree, all the pests off this tree. I could use a soapy water spray. That's going to it's going to dry out the piercing sucking insects, and that might have an ability to control the ants. I can also use ant bait stations at the base of the tree. So even before you're pruning, you should, in terms of that general umbrella of tree care, like I was talking about, these are also factors that you'd want to take in. It's not just pruning, it's all the stuff. Are the leaves lush and vibrant and green? Are they exhibiting any interveinal chlorosis? Are they indicating any signs of nutrient deficiency? I'm looking at that. I see a fruit right here. I see a couple fruit that are split. They haven't matured, but they're split. What is that telling me about the irrigation? Is usually the fruit splitting because of not inadequate, but inconsistent irrigation. Yes?
Excuse me. Have you ever used garlic powder or dissolved garlic to spray?
I personally have not, but I have heard that people use it, and I've heard they've had a moderate amount of success with it.
I've been told, I haven't had no success, by the way.
Okay.
I've been told it's the best there is, there is nothing better in the world.
Well, stuff like that could be affected by environment.
Yeah. So again, back to Tom Del Hotel's example of his inability, his rare inability to be able to get his Aloha mango to produce when someone 10 miles away was producing an abundant amount. So maybe the person who told you that had really good luck with it for whatever reason, based upon what Frank has said. Maybe that's why it worked for him and not for you.
Question on the ants.
Yes.
Are they bad for the tree?
They're better in the soil. If they were in the soil, they would be having a beneficial effect because they'd be aerating the soil. Are they bad? If they wouldn't be in the tree if there wasn't a reason for them to be there. Yeah.
But I guess my question is putting bait along the bottom isn't going to solve the bug problem, right? It solves the ant problem, but not the.
We're causing the ants to go.
Yeah.
Well, okay. The ants are perpetuating the pest presence because they're farming the honeydew. They're farming those piercing, sucking insects to produce honeydew.
And they're going aggressive against beneficials that might take care of those insects.
Oh.
So why is that?
Okay.
And then so the next question is, why is the honeydew detrimental? The honeydew will be detrimental because
What does honeydew?
honeydew is the excrement of what the piercing sucking insect, the aphid or the thrip or the whitefly. It's gonna suck. It's in its saliva has enzymes. It puts its piercing sucking mouth part into the leaf, and the enzymes digest the leaf, the juice of the leaf, and that's what the insect lives on. It produces honeydew, which the ants love. But if you leave the honeydew on the tree, not only if it's a situation like at your home, it could drip on furniture, it could drip on cars, it becomes sticky. But the real problem for the tree is you leave that honeydew unchecked, it's going to attract a mold. It's called black sooty mold. Now your leaf, your solar panel is dirty. It's not going to be able to collect sun because it's got a black mold on it. So that's the end result of the
Because I've
product.
come along and I just clean off the leaves.
Yeah,
On a single tree.
yeah, that's actually, believe it or not, or just like pest management. Like,
And same with white flies. Same thing.
Can you? That's if you have the time and if you have the wherewithal and the patience to do that.
And
that's
it's not too much.
That's non-invasive. That's great. That's fantastic. The scale of the infestation may not allow one to do that, but if you can do that, absolutely. Then you're not then you're not causing any problem. Okay, so ants, irrigation. I see it's a drip line. So what that would mean is here I am underneath the tree. I do want to be cognizant of when I'm walking around. I don't want to break the drip irrigation. I don't want to knock over a sprinkler head, things like that. But getting to the pruning, my own personal pet peeve is these little stubs right here. Right here, these stubs that are left. There's some there.
They didn't prune it
there.
properly.
So,
They didn't prune it enough.
right. Well, and
Close.
in terms of making a proper pruning cut, I just, to me, I was not trained to leave stubs like that. So, I'm not going to go ahead and do every one of them, but that's, in terms of like, what are you going to cut, Jeff? Well, that's the first thing. Is I'll go ahead and I'll cut. Now, right here's a good example. I could fit this saw in here and I could make this cut, but by doing so, because of the angle, my blade is going to be angled in such a way that I'm going to be making a larger cut than is necessary. So rather than start my cut from here, I'm going to start it from here.